Okay, I've turned off the heat, so... Oh, there it goes. It's off.
Okay.
So we'll see how long we can go without freezing.
We should be fine.
I've had the... It's 19 degrees outside in Minneapolis right now. 19 degrees. It is ass-biting cold. I looked at the weather for Kingston, Jamaica, and it's 84 degrees today, so I've been rocking Kingston, Jamaica inside my hotel room. So I just turned off the heat, so there's not the sound of this machine in the background. So we'll see how long we can record this podcast without freezing.
Well, they do insulate very well in Minnesota for days just like today.
Charles Ezell, it's been many years that I've wanted to have you on my podcast. I used to say, after my mother giving birth to me, one of the greatest gifts that was ever given to me was my iPod. You bought it for me as a gift, and my thousands of CDs, and you knew my favorite music. You downloaded or digitized each album by hand, and then uploaded the best of my CD collection onto an iPod for me. And you called it Rhodes Radio. So when I started my podcast, it was Tom Rhodes Radio, which I thought was a cool name that you named that iPod. And then since I started talking about books I'm into and doing more, trying to do more smarter episodes, I added Smart Camp. So the name of the podcast is Tom Rhodes Radio Smart Camp. But
cool.
Yeah.
All right.
So welcome, Charles.
Yeah,
Ezell.
nice to see you again, Tom.
Yeah, man. And you're from Minnesota, but you and I met in San Francisco, and then you lived in this building in Koreatown that I moved to in Los Angeles when I moved back from Amsterdam. And the reason I moved to that building was because of you. So we got a lot of things to talk about. Well, you knew that.
I knew that, but people should know that you were inspired by my apartment, which was like 420 square feet.
It was a tiny studio.
It was like a tiny studio. It looked like a detective's office if they didn't get many cases. It was pretty shit. It's like the guy.
I had a one-bedroom apartment.
But you got a really nice apartment. So we lived in the same.
It was only
building.
$1,300 a month. It was dirt cheap back then.
Well, Koreatown was and this is before the real estate whatever happened to that market.
Yeah, now it's like a trendy neighborhood to live in. But my coolest memory of the Gaylord on Wilshire Boulevard. What was the address?
It was. Jeez, I don't remember.
I was there. I passed. It's 3355, something like that.
3355. Yeah, that's it.
And so I didn't have much furniture in my one-bedroom apartment, but I had a massive living room. And I let you set up your band equipment. You would practice in my living room. So I thought it was really.
We had drums and everything.
I thought it was cool that there was a drum kit set up in my living room, and then there'd be some guitars leaning up against the wall, and you guys would rehearse in there when I was on the road and stuff.
Huh.
I thought that was really cool. And
I had access to your CD collection, so it was fun. And at this time, because I'm not really in. Well, this is the beginning of the 21st century, so I'm still like in the 1800s. I didn't know if you were online that all your CD information would be downloaded automatically. So I must have typed in about.
You did it all by hand.
I did it all by hand.
Yeah, and you had an older computer too. I remember. So like, it wasn't like it would. Each CD didn't download quick.
No, and I don't type very fast, so it was like. But it was really fun. I learned a lot, and I don't remember much of it, but I learned like song orders for like Rolling Stones albums and just things you learn. But it was really fun to like go through all your CDs, and it's a great mix because all of a sudden you're rocking out to something like that. Then here comes Lou Reed. Then here comes Sly and the Family Stone. Here comes the sounds of Argentina. Here comes like great jazz. I mean, it just
and I always love talking about music because like you're also into like classic country and certain jazz artists and things like that. So you and I got similar music tastes, and one of my favorite things was always when I had that iPod, and I still have it. Just the battery's dead, and I've tried to get it replaced, but they're hard to find batteries for. But to have my music collection on shuffle. And I would take it on the road with me or forever walking around listening. Huh. It was great. So, it'd be like Graham Parsons, one song, and then the next song was, Israelites by the Desmonds.
The only thing on there that you didn't have is like Pink Floyd, no Pink Floyd, and that's why you didn't like Pink Floyd.
I did not like Pink Floyd. But so since I got everything out of storage, if you remember, I had like a really nice little vinyl collection too.
Yeah, that's right.
And I had a big kitchen, and I had my vinyl record player set up in the kitchen.
That's right, yeah.
So when I would cook, I would put on a vinyl record. And I always enjoyed that. So the La Jolla Comedy Store near San Diego, directly behind it in this little mini mall plaza, is this Thai restaurant that I love. Mm-hmm. And I was in there like 2 years ago, and the cook was selling his vinyl record. I guess it's family owned, and the guy's getting older, and he doesn't listen to his vinyl records anymore. So this guy was, and I caught it early because obviously he didn't like Google how much these things were worth. This guy had everything. Zeppelin, he had every Pink Floyd, and he was selling them all for like $10. So I bought like 5 of the best Pink Floyd albums. Okay. And I listened to them. So actually, I'm a little more turned around on Pink Floyd than I used to be.
I was just curious, I was just like,
the one with the album where the guy is the businessman is on fire.
Yeah. Wish You Were Here.
That's the best Pink Floyd.
I love that one.
That one's great.
I had that on 8-track. That's how old I am.
Yeah. So, one place I wanted to start with you. I know. Did you hear the joke I did last night about living in Los Angeles? This is my 3rd time living in Los Angeles. I never thought I'd live there again. The twice I left Los Angeles going, fuck this town. I hate everybody in it. But I'm older now. My perspective has changed. I lived in Los Angeles 20 years ago, and I was looking for fame and money. I lived in Los Angeles 10 years ago, and I was looking for drugs and women. And now that I'm older, I can appreciate Los Angeles for the fine fruits and vegetables that are available in the local markets. So if you ever hear me say, hey, look at that peach, I actually mean, look at that peach. What a pair. So the 10 years ago joke was from when we were living in the Gaylord in Koreatown. And I was more concerned with going to dive bars in Los Angeles and drinking than I was with my career. It's been like, because Ashton and I were together for 10 years. So this was probably like 14 years ago. Okay. That period.
Because I left 10 years ago, so I was gone by 2009, I'm pretty sure.
So I guess it was about 14 years ago when I was living there. But one place I wanted to start with you was, do you remember when we went to the Dodgers versus the Cubs at Dodger Stadium, and you and I, with my dad and
my
Matt
buddy
North,
Dan,
or was it
my friend Dan, I believe?
Okay. And what's his name? Mike from Chicago.
Yeah, your buddy Mike. We met him there.
Yeah, and you and I did mushrooms.
Yeah.
And we sat up in the upper deck, and no one else was on mushrooms. And you and I laughed our heads off that entire game. So what I remember, the Cubs were atrocious. They got pounded that day. It was like 12 Dodger hits, and the Dodgers won 9-1, something like that. And the Cubs had not won the World Series yet, so there was still the curse of the GOAT hanging over them. And every time the Cubs would fuck up, you and I would say to Mike, was that the GOAT's fault too? And then we were just like...
Which is way hilarious on that day.
But it was funny that my dad was there.
That's when I met your dad.
When you and I were on mushrooms.
We were tripping on mushrooms. And he finds out I'm from Minnesota and your dad's from Washington, D.C. And for real baseball fans, the Twins used to be the original Washington Senators. So when he found out I was a Twins fan, it's like captive audience. Let's talk about muddy rules, mad dash from second to win the 1924 World Series. I mean, so it was really cool. His favorite player was Mickey Vernon. I haven't ever been able to talk about Mickey Vernon other than Greg Proops. You can't talk about Mickey Vernon, who was a very, very good player.
In the mid-50s, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. My dad took my brothers and I to the last Washington Senators game in 1972. I was 5 years old. My dad thought it was important that we would be there. And I vaguely remember it. I more remember it from my dad talking.
That is like the most punk rock day.
But everybody, they didn't finish the game. Everyone stormed on the field and started ripping up the field and trying to get souvenirs and everything.
You know, it's funny. I watched the World Series and the Nationals, and I didn't watch every minute of every play, but I watched a lot of it. That is the most remarkable game of all time because, one, it didn't finish. It's the last Senator game as a Senator. It's the second Senators who ended up becoming the Texas Rangers. But there was a riot. I mean, the fans just basically said, you're going to do this to us again, and they just, let their feelings know, and it's like they just trashed the place.
It was the most punk rock day in baseball.
Yeah, I think so. In baseball history, 1973 or whatever it was. It's but it's like it's very Iggy Pop.
I think it's interesting. I watched that Ken Burns baseball documentary not that long ago, and all of the development of baseball has been a struggle between employees versus the owners. Mm-hmm. And free agency, what it took to get that, and these players started their own union like 100 years ago, and then the owners just locked them out and got replacement players. So, I mean, there is the class warfare struggle.
Yeah, dividing up the money's been a problem for a long time.
What do you remember about my dad?
Well, one, he's just like a great storyteller. It's like and like I said, he one of those guys that likes to talk that you like to listen to, but damn, it was just like, you coming out of that, it makes a lot of sense, because you don't get a word in edgewise with that guy. So I'm really glad that you've had your career to kind of make up for that.
I'm sorry, the beginning of this podcast was a repeat of that experience. I spoke for the first 10 minutes.
No, but it's and just a larger in life, funny, tells great stories. We talk about Vietnam and stuff like that. It's like, I didn't spend that much time with your dad, but he's like one of those guys that, and he just loved the hell out of you, and he was so proud of you, and he just thought, my son is like the cool. He was really proud of you, and he just liked your style, and you guys are so different. There's not, other than you're funny, that's about it. But,
yeah, my dad was full of factoids and knowledge nuggets.
Yeah.
So I get that influence from him.
Yeah.
Like when my whole life, my dad was my encyclopedia. I could just.
And he does.
Dad, what was the point of the Peloponnesian War? Well, two democracies were fighting each other, and the guy just knew a lot of shit.
Your dad would have been a great overnight radio host, like Larry King used to be, where people just call in to talk about anything.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, he was a real history buff, and then and sports fanatic. And I know my dad loved you because you guys could talk obscure sports stuff. You're a big, huge baseball fan, Yeah. And then there was the story where, it was great. After Amsterdam, when I moved to Koreatown, those 2 years, I got to hang out with my dad all the time. And there was one time, it might have been when we went to that Cubs game and we did mushrooms. My dad had come over early, and there was the Gaylord had a bar. There's a bar there. It's called the HMS Bounty. And we were down, and some contractor had been kidnapped in Iraq.
Oh,
and
that's
these
right.
Islamic militants had put out, a video on the news, and Timmy Johnson, whatever his name was, he's got to read nervously from this prepared thing, and the hooded Islamic militants are behind him with the ISIS flag, and that was the big news that week. And then that day, before we were going to the game, my dad, I don't know if you were there, we're at the bar.
Yeah, I remember that.
And the news was on, and they said it had been announced that Tim Johnson had in fact been beheaded. And somberly, the newscaster looks into the camera and he goes, "We'll be right back with the reaction from Tim Johnson's parents." And my dad goes, "Tim lost his head before, but it was never anything like this."
And loud enough so other people
Never
could
the whole
hear
bar would hear.
without being too loud. It was very professionally done.
Yeah.
Yeah, he clearly had been at a bar before because he was very good at being in a bar.
Yeah, he was very comfortable.
And very charming with the ladies, as I remember. He
Yeah, my
wasn't
dad
afraid
had
to
a
talk to
magic
women.
power over women. Interesting. What from the Gaylord? What are your memories from that place? And I remember so that bar. I thought, oh, this would be great. If I wanted to live back in L.A. and try and get something going on with television because I'd come out of doing this television in Holland, and I thought, oh, at the very least, I'll get to hang out with my buddy Charles. And that HMS Bounty, this is an old classic L.A. bar, I thought, oh, that'd be a cool place to hang out. And then after living there for a couple of years, the regulars there soured the whole thing.
Are you talking about the old regulars?
The old regulars. Remember the black guy named Frank?
Yeah,
and
Frank.
Everything was, you can't trust Whitey. Everything, I just slumped over his drink, and everything was, you can't trust Whitey, which is an accurate assessment of life on the planet. But then there was this Korean guy that was a real dick when he got drunk, and he
I don't know
killed some people in a driving home drunk once.
Yeah, and he, in fact, I think I can talk about this, but about a year before he killed that guy, he killed a guy on a bicycle when he was drunk. But
he used to get planned. He was such a dick.
Yeah, I almost got arrested
Terrible
for
human
assault. He was bugging me once. I'm trying to eat a salad. And I don't know if you've ever had someone try to pick a fight with you while you're trying to eat a salad.
Who picks a fight with a guy eating a salad?
You figure you're safe, but he was just going, I'm going to take you outside and kick you. Just all this tough guy stuff. And, I went around the table trying to intimidate him. And I brought my fork just in case. But, he tripped over his chair or something like that. And I told him to whatever. I got kicked out of the bar for a month, but he got kicked out for life, so I was like a hero.
Yeah,
and,
nobody.
But no, and then he started having the cops look for me.
What? For what?
Yeah, for assault.
Oh.
Because because he tripped over his chair. But maybe I've said too much.
I think the statute of limitations is certain.
I hope so. I mean, I didn't. I just had it was a salad fork. I mean, it's not that scary.
I usually walk around with salad, so I don't have to fight.
I thought I was safe.
You want another tea?
Yeah, I'll have another tea.
Here, let me make some more hot water for you. There was a lot of characters. I mean, there was one guy. I lived on the 3rd floor. I was in 3B, and there was a guy who was from Chicago.
Guitar player?
No, he was also kind of a pinhead, but always wore like Chicago Bears thing. But so he was real loud mouth.
Yeah. Frenchie, William French.
Okay, so he started dating some girl that lived on my floor, and I was coming home one time. And I'm come off the elevator and I'm walking down the hall, and he was in front of her apartment crying like a baby. I mean, please, baby, let me. I'm so sorry. And here's this guy that I thought was a total prick. Now I totally had total sympathy for him. I mean, we've all been like a blubbering mess over a woman before. So here's this guy I had no sympathy for whatsoever, and then I saw him at his weakest, most vulnerable, just crying. I was like, okay, now I can relate to you. Yeah. When you're an arrogant prick, I saw nothing I could relate to.
One of the things about the Gaylord, and there's some wonderful people there. The problem with the bar, one, you had a bunch of, it was in Koreatown, and it was full of Korea War vets, which was just always, so.
Whose joke was it? Koreatown. It's not just a neighborhood, it's failed foreign policy.
That was my joke, yeah.
That was your joke.
That was my
classic.
But, so you had some, but there's some great guys. Remember Shin, who's Japanese? He was from Japantown. He'd been an internment camp. Jack Heitlinger was a real cool guy. He was an attorney. Yeah, these guys like to drink, but they would come to my shows. So I'd have these shows, and I had these 75-year-old guys that thought I was just great. So some of those guys, the pricks didn't come, but William French wasn't too bad. He was, but it was in fact, one of the songs I wrote, I was going to tell that story then, but I remember once I was.
Which song, Louis?
I Can't Die in L.A.
Okay, yeah, all right. We'll play that one first. Go ahead.
But the truth, one day I was looking out I had the bad side. The Wilshire Avenue didn't have a great view. In those days, the old Ambassador Hotel was still up. It's now a school. But at the time, it was just this crumbling old building.
Yeah, and it sat empty. I had a perfect view. You were on like the 8th floor.
I was on the 4th.
Oh, the 4th. And I was on the 3rd. Oh, I thought you were higher up than that.
No.
And that was the view outside the front window. And it was this old Ambassador Hotel, which was where Chaplin and Howard Hughes hung out in the 20s.
They filmed that Howard Hughes movie with
Leonardo DiCaprio.
Yeah, the Coconut Grove was the big nightclub there. And yeah, so they filmed a few films there before the...
Yeah, and you could see those palm trees in the yard, and then there's this abandoned hotel across the street.
And my favorite, you had just moved in there, and we had gotten some really crazy, powerful mushrooms.
No, this was towards the end, because this is the story I'm thinking of. Because it was towards the end. It was when I took this as like a sign that I needed to move out of there.
Oh, is that when it happened?
Yeah, because
I remember
the wine guy had fallen to his death.
Yeah.
This kid that I loved. He was from Oklahoma. Oh, I got to tell you that story.
Yeah. Jason.
And I love this guy, and he was a wine importer, and we were always like, yeah, we'll get together and we'll hang out, but we never did because we were busy. He met some girl in the bar downstairs. Then he took her up to the balcony, which was the fire escape, which was right outside my kitchen window, and I heard that he was drinking, and then he fell off to his death.
Well, the story I heard, I remember that morning, she had left her coat in the room, and he had locked his key in. So there was a ledge you could walk on. So he had the window open, so he's just going to walk there, and he just fell.
You are correct. Because here's the thing I didn't find out till years later. A couple years ago, I was there, and I went in to go to the bathroom, and there was a doorman from the Czech Republic. He's still there.
Oh, yeah.
And so I told him, hey, I used to live here, and I'm talking to him, and he's, oh, I kind of remember you. And I said, yeah, you remember when that guy fell to his death? And Czech Republic guy goes, he was a fucking idiot. He did not fall off the fire escape. He's a fucking idiot. He tried to walk on the ledge to get to his open window. He locked the key in for some girl. And I had never heard this version. You know, I was on the road. I came back, and then there was like flowers on the sidewalk where the guy had fallen to his death and shit. And guy told me that, which your story is correct. And I looked up. The ledge is only like 3 inches wide.
Oh, exactly.
And he lived halfway down the building in the middle. There's no way you couldn't have done that sober.
Right.
So, that guy falls to his death, and I was like, and I thought it had happened right outside my kitchen window. So I wrote this joke about it that I live in an old building and it's haunted with ghosts. I know that because whenever I masturbate, they giggle. So that joke came out of that guy dying, actually. Because at first it was a really long bit about this friend of mine had died. And so sometime after that, you and I were doing the mushrooms, and they were not good mushrooms. They were terrible mushrooms.
But they made you watch grass grow and stuff like that. It was like, I had to leave the party I was at and come back to the Gaylord because I was...
Well, so I'm in my apartment, and I'm having a bad reaction to the mushrooms, and... For some reason, I've always hated the song Hotel California. And you hear it all over the world. Every, hack cover band playing in a hotel lounge, everyone knows Hotel California. I think it's the most overplayed song. I always thought the warm smell of colitis and all that shit. Never liked that song. So I looked out across the street, and here's this abandoned Ambassador Hotel at night. And the figures, silhouettes of the palm trees, and I realized I was living across the street from the worst song ever written, and I got profoundly bummed out.
Oh, the look on your face was just like you found out like your whole world. I mean, it was like, what's wrong, Tom? I just moved across the street from the worst song of all time.
So yeah, that was like a sign that I needed, and I was on the road half the time. But my favorite memory on my apartment, 3B, only from my apartment, could you crawl out the window and get onto the roof of the Brown Derby Plaza?
Yeah.
And it was this massive rooftop, and I bought a big swatch of AstroTurf from Home Depot. That was cool. I didn't even have ropes. I just drove really slow down Wilshire Boulevard from the Home Depot downtown. And then I pulled it up and I got it upstairs. You helped me carry it up there. And I called it Rhodes Beach, and I had some lawn chairs. And then I bought like 100 wiffle balls in that plastic bat. And you and I used to sit out there and have batting practices for hours and smack wiffle balls.
In fact, you could probably still find a couple of wiffle balls rolling around Wilshire Avenue in Koreatown, because they don't wear out. Those things just last forever.
Hard plastic.
Hard plastic.
Well, the coolest thing was hitting like a foul ball. Like a foul ball would go onto Wilshire Boulevard, and it'd be like just clogged with traffic, and it would just bounce off of someone's windshield. It wouldn't do any harm.
Buses. And it is the most crowded, congested part of Los Angeles. There's just so many people going. So it's always fun knowing that you're just raining wiffle balls on bottleneck traffic. It was awesome.
That was cool, man. Sitting
fun
out there just smacking balls with you was awesome. Where's your cup?
But I remember that I used to always think of the Rossmar not as the worst song of all time, but it always reminded me of like an old-fashioned insane asylum. Like you'd see, like, I don't know, the chief from the Pink Panther movies would end up at. That's what it reminded me of, with the big yard and, And one day I'm sitting there in my underwear just kind of looking out the window, and I had this realization that the Vassar Hotel wasn't an insane asylum, but in fact it was a mirror showing all those crazy people at the Gaylord. It was but some wonderful people.
What were you going to say about the French guy? Did he help you inspire that "Don't Want to Die in L.A." song?
No, it's just I wrote that song like after realizing it was a mental institution. It was like one of those 10-minute songs where you just, there's not a lot of words to it, and it's 3 chords, but yeah, I wrote that super fast. But it was like staring at the old Ambassador Hotel. Kind of inspired that song. And it was like, Robert F. Kennedy died there, so maybe that was the connection.
Yeah, and Sirhan apparently ate at the Gaylord and the HMS Bounty right before he walked across the street.
Is that true, or did we make that up?
That's what I had heard.
Okay, you heard that. Because I couldn't remember. I remember I thought that, like, because I always said we had a baseball steak before he went over and shot RFK. That was the best thing on the menu. It was like for $10 you could get
baseball
like
steak.
Nice.
What was that, hamburger mashed into a ball?
No, it was just a chunk of. It was like a round piece of steak. It was pretty good. The cooking was excellent, and you got a baked potato and vegetable and a salad that had a nice house dressing. It was a great place, and the drinks were just value laden. They weren't very expensive, and they put because they're trying to get all these old men drunk. So there were no weak drinks in that place. I remember if you drank beer there, you always felt like you were wasting money because they're like triple pours. You get a vodka and soda, but you'd be hammered by the time you're done with that.
Well, let's play the song "I Don't Want to Die in L.A."
Okay, I Can't Die in L.A.
I Can't Die in L.A. And I remember when you were working on these songs. And I remember seeing you, playing them live and working on them, and you would play me songs that you were working on, and I've always talked with you about jokes and things. You're a creative person, and I've always loved your friendship and everything. And I remember when I had the same feeling as this song when I got the fuck out of there. I was like, that's not my town. I don't fucking belong in Los Angeles. So I really loved the song. Let's hear it.
Okay.
Dreams don't come true, nothing happens to you. I can't die in LA. It's a beautiful spot. It's sunny and hot. I can't die in LA. There's something I always believed in. Someday I will be leaving with buckets of gold and a hand I could hold. I can't die in LA. There's something I always believed in. Someday I will be leaving with buckets of gold and a hand I could hold. I can't die in LA. Dreams don't come true, nothing happens to you. I can't die in LA.
So you just pretend we're listening to it.
And then we'll just slice it in there.
This is beautiful, man. This is like being on TV again.
So, Hail the Size. You wrote some great stuff, but then after Los Angeles, you ended up moving to Nashville.
Yeah, I moved. I impulsively moved to Nashville. I'd gone there a few times, and I had some friends.
I think everybody's moving there now. You did it 10 years ago. It wasn't...
I moved there at the absolutely worst time. It's like either I get to a place right as it's ending, like I got to San Francisco. It's like the Improv closed 2 weeks later. It was down to 2 clubs right away, and then I moved to Nashville too early. I went back there last year to visit some friends, and my friend Brian Kotzer, who's a great drummer, he said, "You left too early. It was terrible when you were here, but now it's great." But it was so I just impulsively moved there, and then like the band, I was in a band with Matt North. That was basically Hail the Size. It was the two of us. I was the singer and the writer, and he was the drummer and the producer, and I thought we had a really good thing going. And then I don't know what happened, when 2 people on the spectrum get into a disagreement, people do things impulsively, and I just moved to Nashville. So we never we made an album, and then before we could even release it, we broke up. So, again, not great timing, but I decided, okay, I can write songs now, I'm going to move to Nashville. And evidently I didn't read the pamphlet because everyone else moved to Nashville to write songs. And it was weird. It was like starting comedy all over again because, you play your open mics and you hang out with a bunch of people with dreams. They're really enthusiastic, and 6 months later they're super bitter. And some of them hang
like
on.
the way it used to be with comedians moving to LA. I used to say, you'd see guys who had a sparkle in their eye, and then they live in LA for a couple years and the sparkle leaves.
Gone.
I mean, but that was like that was the old days. Like I have a different feeling towards LA now.
And I hope to. I've lived in northern Minnesota for 4 years, so my animosity towards LA is completely gone. What I think it's always what you bring to the LA table. I mean, that makes you want to leave. You're looking for something you're just not getting, or it's not coming fast enough. But I love living in Nashville for a few years. I mean, I'm glad I live there.
It's a great city.
It's a great town. And I did get out of LA right before comedy became huge. Another just bad timing. Because it's hard to explain to the kids today, because there were no podcasts in those days, or they were just starting. It's just a whole new world. It's neat. I love it. And the same thing with music. I mean, I'm one of those people who's middle-aged now who I love the young people. I think what they do creatively and their seriousness, and they work hard on stuff, and they just don't seem to sit around and wait for fame to come to them like certain members of my generation did. I might be partly like that too, but, I'm not saying everything they do is great, but I don't know. there's just so much stuff out there, and it's neat, and people are trying to be funny, and that's good.
What was the best lesson that you learned from living in Nashville?
Be humble. Everyone can play better guitar than you. Everyone can write better songs than you. Everyone can write better songs than you. But people are nice. It's okay to have a day job. You know, that's why the difference between LA, I noticed, like, LA, everyone lies about having a day job or getting money from their parents. Their source of income is like well-guarded secrets because they want people to they make money from show business.
Right.
But Nashville, you know, people openly talk about having a job and what do they do, and it's just more down to earth, but it's the same stars in your eyes kind of things, and you know, it's the same thing I learned in comedy. It's like there's greatness everywhere, so the measures of what rich and famous means, and that stuff's all immaterial. You know, it's you'd walk down the street and you'd see some guy and it looks like he's barely alive, and he's one of the best session players in the history. You know, I had a great guy. I used to work at this terrible bar, the Hall of Fame Lounge
in Nashville.
Oh, it's awful. It's like off of Best Western, and it was like.
I just picture like Boog Powell hanging out there, Harmon Killebrew. Here comes Reggie Jackson.
Here comes Reggie Jackson.
Hall of Fame Lounge, where they all drink.
So, just dismal. It was haunted by ghosts. It had a bad smell, like a leaky, like, pipe, so it always smelled like farts, and it was a beer only. It was just a terrible place to work, but this guy named Grant Boatwright used to always come, and he's played guitar on all kinds of things, and, you know, and just funny as hell. But here's this guy drinking wine coolers at the end of the bar. It's like, he just looks like some old dude, but here's one of the great, you know, guitar players of his time. And I remember once he was talking about, I'm going to be working with Jerry Lee Lewis. And he's like really excited. And here's like a 60-year-old guy just like acting like, I hope he likes me, you know. And so we're sitting at the bar one day, and he gets this phone call on his cell phone. And he looks at it. And he just looks at me. It's Killer. You know, Jerry Lee Lewis called me at the bar. So I was this close. I was this close to Jerry Lee Lewis. It's a guy talking to Jerry Lee Lewis on the phone. So that's my biggest fame story. No, but it was a good time. I met some really great people, and they have a great indie rock scene there. And what I ended up doing, I thought I was going to write like country songs, and I realized I don't write country songs. You think you do, but they're not. And so I ended up making there's a good indie rock kind of punk scene there, so I started this duo with my friend Kevin Guthrie called Hawkfish, and we just had these kind of wacky songs that were like they weren't country at all, and it was really fun. It was more of a comedy thing, but
well, I'm not a big fan of modern country. I like, well, I mean, you know, Sturgill Simpson and what's the other guy? I got their records. I like those guys. There's some cool, raw, kind of outlaw country shit happening with Sturgill Simpson and, God, what's that other guy's name? But Josh Wolf, comedian, was telling me that people are missing out on modern country because it's like rock and roll was in the 80s. Modern country now is all about partying and girls and having fun. So I don't know. I've been missing that.
I'm out of the country western loop. Like I said, and there's a great place called the Springwater there. You'd have great rock shows. So we got to like open for different rock and roll bands and punk things, and it was like it was really fun because it was like me just like completely rejecting country western songs like "I Am the Shit," and "Get Up in Ya," and stuff like that.
Had they built the Johnny Cash Museum?
No, not yet.
Okay. Because I've been there, and I got glasses from the gift shop. If you come to my house, it's all Johnny Cash Museum cups you'll be drinking.
Did we go to the Hall of Fame when you were there? We see Webb Pierce's
I didn't go there with you. I went there once with Ashna, and that Country Music Hall of Fame is excellent.
Oh, it's a great museum.
It's beautifully done. and great memorabilia, great stuff. The Johnny Cash Museum is really good.
Okay, I'd like to see that.
Prince's Hot Chicken, baby.
You know, that place burned down.
I heard.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And, it's hard to believe that there'd be a fire on that, what would you call it, mini mall?
Yeah.
But great chicken, I love it.
Jesus,
Worth the wait.
that's good chicken.
What was your
And I
joke?
love spicy, and I could only handle the medium. It was so hot. The joke I did was it's
2008.
Prince's Hot Chicken is actually where Johnny Cash ate, but right before he wrote Ring of Fire.
Well, the other joke I remember you writing, it was 2008, and it took
forever
to get a chicken. And Prince is African-American owned establishment. And your joke was, it took so long I almost voted for McCain.
I was this close to voting for John McCain. If they'd have made me wait 5 more minutes.
But it's great chicken, worth the wait. Always get more than you want because you want to eat it the next day. No, it was fun, and I had some. It was creatively a really good place, and then and then I just. But at some point I left, as I do, and.
Well, sometimes it's time to move on. You know, I lived in Amsterdam for San Francisco for 7 years. You know, I've lived in Amsterdam for 5 years. I've lived in New York twice. You know, sometimes you just, as my father used to say, unass a place. So, you know.
And I tried moving back to LA, which just wasn't happening. So I actually was going back to LA, and I stopped at my friend Bob Nastanovich lives in Des Moines, Iowa, and I was driving back from Minnesota. And I just was at his place for a couple of days because I don't feel like going back to LA. He said, well, get a job here and see if you like Des Moines. And I lived there for about, a year and a half.
Des Moines?
Yeah, it was all right. But I was a waiter, and tip your servers, man. That job sucks. It is so much work. I had an anxiety attack like every day. In fact, I really believe that waiting tables, it didn't make me crazy, but it revealed my symptoms. And so I did that for a while, and then I moved up to Minnesota, but I got a chance to live in northern Minnesota and caretake this communist-owned.
Okay, cool. So I want to hear about your life in Minnesota and the hippie commune you were living on up there. Before we get into that, let's listen to one more of your songs that I loved. So this song is called Babies. And I don't know if you remember, there was also a little something I was going through at the time. Back then, when I was living at the Gaylord in Koreatown, I was accused in a paternity suit.
Oh, that's right, Frank.
And I had to get a lawyer for the very first time in my life. And I had a court-appointed DNA test. And then the woman who said that I was the father of this child didn't take in her child to be tested for 10 months after the kid was born. Oh. So this was hanging over me for a really long time. I mean, I had to get the DNA test even, before the kid was even born. So I was having all kinds of anxiety. It was it was just anyway, it was someone I just didn't want to have a kid at the time. So obviously that's your feelings in this song. And I remember when you wrote this song, I remember it was when I was going through what I was going through.
Well, and two, sometimes I get a little hard on myself, but I am really proud of the fact that I have not brought any children to this world. And I will accept your thank yous at any time, but
Thanks,
I'm
Charles.
no drain on anything. It's just, when I leave this planet, I'm going to leave no more. I mean, there's not going to be a bunch of offspring, running around pissing people off. So, you're welcome.
All right,
America.
So what? Can you tell us anything about this song?
Well, I wrote this song actually. There's a guy that was living in the Gaylord, and there's a good friend of mine, Mark Masterson, he's an attorney now. He was a law student at the time. And I was telling some story about something, and I just said booze, pills, and her, and it was
No, we're gonna play that one last.
Oh, we haven't. Okay,
Yeah, we're gonna play
babies.
Babies next.
Oh, we're gonna do babies.
Yeah.
Well, let me tell the story about babies. Oh, no, I had a bass one day, and I was just goofing around on it, and I'm trying to think lyrically where it came from, but it was like one of those really fast songs that I wrote really, really fast, and I guess I do that song now, and I've changed the name to No Babies just so people get the point. And I play it a lot faster and more angry than I did at the time, but just to show that I still believe in it. But yeah, that's just one of those quickies I wrote, I wrote it on a bass. That's about the only notable thing about that. And I don't play bass, so babies.
All right, let's have it.
1, 2, 3, 4. Pride and joy, no little girl, no little boy. I just want a little love, nothing sent from high above. I don't wanna meet your folks and start a life and just go broke. No rings, no strings, no I do's. I wanna leave when I'm sick of you. No babies, 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 babies. They cry loud, just say cool, then they grow up, they eat a lot. Turn on you, take all you got. I like being one and only. I'll call you if I get lonely, no regrets. If I never didn't say I wanna live forever. Babies, 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 babies. Maybe I'm blowing it, but I can't go for it, 'cause I can't find the time. Babies, 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 babies. Maybe I'm blowing it, but I can't go for it, 'cause I can't find the light.
Well, that was refreshing, especially with 10 years, 14-year hindsight on the song now. It doesn't frighten me the way it used to.
It's less likely this is going to happen to me now than it did 15 years ago. So,
I did write the one song about it was proven that the child was not mine, and thank God for DNA testing, because in the old days they would hold a baby up next to you in court, and the jurors would look at you and look at the baby and go, that nose is similar. And the reason I know that is because I read a few Charlie Chaplin biographies. And twice in Charlie Chaplin's life, he had a baby held up next to him in court. Whoa. That's why he started wearing the floppy shoes and the funny mustache. That ain't my kid. So how did you even discover a hippie commune in Minnesota?
It's not
Was there a flyer in a laundromat somewhere?
About 20-some years ago, I got invited to a beer party. And they held it at this campground called Mesaba Co-op Park. And it's just a nice little beautiful place. Built in the 20s by mostly Finnish communists who had been kind of, were very active in the labor movement. So it really was a significant place in the community. But it was a place that they started so they could do their political organization without being harassed by the police. They had a children's camp out that it was a really neat historically place, and it's owned by cooperatively. And it was just they needed a caretaker, and I was in this whole. Leonard Cohen was talking about. I think he was still alive then, or maybe he died. I heard some interview, and he went up in Mount Baldy and lived with the monks and shoveled snow, and that always appealed to me, like that retreat in the woods. But I don't think I could hang with monks for that long. Leonard Cohen was kind of saying that sometimes you just got to cut out and go to the deli and get some decent meat to eat,
Yeah.
So, but it was like they needed a caretaker, and I just kind of, lived there in the woods, 4 months out of the year, and then I ended up renting a house right by there. So I'd lived in cities for 20 years, and I just wanted to see what the country life would be like. And, I got a cool little house. I got the drums in the kitchen now, but I live 20 feet from a bar that serves food. It's a common theme in my life. You got to be real close to to the recreation. But
what's the name of the bar?
The Thirsty Moose.
The Thirsty Moose. Yeah. And what town is this in?
Cherry, Minnesota.
Cherry, Minnesota.
Which is right adjacent to Hibbing, Minnesota. And
where Bob
Dylan grew up. So, and not a lot has changed in Hibbing since Bob Dylan left town in 1959. It's iron ore mining was the big industry up there. It still is. It's still a mining region, but it's just not. The average age is about, 67.
What's your favorite Dylan song?
My favorite. I'm not great on, but the song.
I'd like to spend some time in Mozambique.
That was the first.
That's a good one.
It's funny you mention that, because if I was going to say Hurricane.
Great
Only
song.
Because when I was a kid, I bought that album. It was brand new, and I took it home, and I played it over and over. I loved Hurricane. I just love. It's such different writing in that. Joey. I love that.
It's a great album.
It's a great album, and the stories are really like kind of cinematic and long, and that's always been my favorite album. But just because personal reasons. But I'll say Joey. Joey. That song on side 2. It's about that mobster that. Do you know that song about Joey Gallo?
I don't remember it.
It's a cool song. It's like a Martin Scorsese movie set to music. It's just like, it's pretty good. It's just like, yeah.
So, who are some of your favorite writers in books and music, and what knowledge nuggets can you regale the listener with?
Well, that's a lot. I mean, it's right now my obsession is old NFL football. In fact, I'm going to be starting a podcast talking about football in the 20s and the 30s and the 40s and into the 50s. And the one knowledge nugget I got, and I didn't realize, because I didn't really know much about old NFL, if it was, pre-Super Bowl stuff, Johnny Unitas had a crew cut, Sammy Bob, I didn't know a whole lot.
Art Donovan,
the Hall of Famer. But the very first professional football player, I think in 1893, something like that. This was kept secret for years. He was paid under the table because in those days, pro football was like, it was like somewhere between like bum fighting and crack dealing in terms of, it wasn't something you wanted to be associated with. But he's the very first professional football player. He played somewhere in Pittsburgh, made $500. But he's from Minneapolis, Minnesota. Pudge Heffelfinger.
Pudge Heffelfinger?
Yeah, he was a big star guard at Yale back in the day. And he managed, and he played football into his 60s. He wasn't a regular football player, but he was a big, strong guy, and he would get into games. And I think and he was a big, successful businessman here in Minnesota. And he was playing both ways in football games into his 50s or something like that. But
he was bisexual?
Yeah, Pudge. Wow, that's how I got the name.
I'm kidding. What a great name.
Pudge Heffelfinger.
Pudge Heffelfinger. What are some knowledge nuggets about Minnesota and Minneapolis?
Well, one of my favorite. Who would probably be your favorite football player? I know other things other than football, but Johnny Blood McNally. I don't know if you've ever heard of him.
Great name, Johnny Blood.
He got his name. He's from western Wisconsin, but he went to school in central Minnesota, and he was living in Minneapolis. And there's a team. Him and his buddy were going to play for a team locally, and he was still enrolled at Notre Dame, but was getting the process of getting kicked out by Newt Rockne, and him and his buddy were going to go play for this team, and they wanted to use fake names, and they drove by a movie marquee, the Valentino movie Blood and Sand was playing, and he goes, "I'm Blood, you're Sand." So he was Johnny Blood, but he was a really well-educated. He's like the Tom Rhodes of football players, because he liked to have a good time. He liked to drink, but he liked to do things like go out on a balcony and recite Shakespeare to woo women, and he just was. One great story I read about him is like he was at a party. With an opera star. So it's like some big, wild, crazy 20s party. Everyone's drunk and on heroin or whatever he did at those parties, and they realized, oh my God, we're out of ice. So he saw the Iceman doing his delivery. This was like 4 a.m. So he ran out there and he bought 180-pound block ice and carried it on his back up to like the 12th floor on the elevator. He got on the elevator, and it's like there's 2 women on there. It's like, how you doing, ladies? And they were scared out of their mind. But Johnny Blood McNally.
The hero of the party.
But yeah, Minneapolis, and where we are right now in Minneapolis is, I don't know if you ever heard of the 1934 Teamsters strike.
Tell me all about it.
In 1934, there was a lot of labor unrest because in 1932, the right to collective bargain was available now. So one thing FDR did, he didn't necessarily energize the left personally, but once you could collectively bargain, all these radical labor unions have been around for years and never really won anything, could collectively bargain now. So 5 Trotskyite communists first ran a coal strike where basically they just shut down the town. All the truck drivers couldn't deliver coal. They waited till it got really cold. 3 days later, they settled. So they took that momentum and basically shut down Minneapolis, and there was like a lot of open warfare, and trucks full of baseball bats and goons, Pinkertons and stuff like that. And
always got goons.
But they won the strike, and Minneapolis was a terrible labor town, and it really opened it up, and it kind of helped create the middle class that we know, and Minneapolis was also full of gangsters at that time. There's a whole neat underground that they don't really talk about.
St. Paul was a hideout for gangsters, because I've read about John Dillinger. He's someone I've always been fascinated by, and there was a hideout house in St. Paul where he would hang out. And apparently, I mean, like a lot of wealthy people live in St. Paul now, but like in the 1930s, that was where real fugitives went and laid low for a while.
The police department was completely bought off. So if you didn't do crime in St. Paul, you could stay in St. Paul. So it was a safe haven town for guys like Dillinger. But they had the local gangs here. There was so much anti-Semitism in Minneapolis in the first half of the century, particularly, that a lot of the gangsters came from the poor Jewish neighborhoods. And there was a guy named Kid Can, Isadora Blumenfeld, but he ran this town probably from the 1920s into the 1960s. They finally nabbed him, but went from just this poor kid hustling, running errands for pimps and prostitutes, and just kind of built this little empire. But he was notorious. Ended up being buddies with Meyer Lansky, and that's where he retired after he got out of jail. Went to Florida and probably did a bunch of shaky real estate deals, but.
So this neighborhood where we are, where Acme Comedy Club is, so this was a warehouse district.
Yeah.
So all these Teamsters were gunned down.
Yeah, right over here. There's a plaque where 2 men were killed in an ambush. So yeah, it's really a lot of the stuff happened right downtown here, and there were days like it was really bad. Where just a lot of gunfire. They invented the flying picket. They're trying to shut down all these. They couldn't control every coal yard because they just didn't have enough men. So what they did is they just got a bunch of guys with baseball bats and cars, and then had like informants telling them where scabs were driving. So they would just drive over there,
beat them up,
drag them out of their car, and then they would take the coal. They'd hijack the truck, and then like dump it in front of like a poor neighborhood, so people got free coal, or in front of a convent or something like that. So it's been really interesting times. In fact, I tried to write about it a few years ago, but it was a daunting task that I haven't given up on. But just really, really interesting stuff. The confluence of all these different interests. And they had a great governor in those days, Floyd B. Olson, who was kind of wasn't afraid of a drink, and was pretty good with the ladies too, but an interesting political figure.
So you told me some people. So like that camp kind of commune that you were living at up in northern Minnesota. They were like political people, like
that was. In fact, to this day, there's people that won't go up there because they don't want to hang out with the commies. Up on the range, a lot of people call it the commie camp. And then there's a reputation that it's a nudist camp. But I think that's because that's a combination between like a lot of hippies types in the 70s kind of saved that park as the older generation.
So what was it like? So you moved into a little house up there, cherry, but you were living on this commune.
Yeah, I was living in a little cabin.
So what did you guys get naked and then go out and like pick cherries? What was?
No, it's like but basically it was just a campground. No, there'd be events like there was a midsummer celebration, but since it's a cooperative, they'd have these things called work bees. So once a month, people come and we'd do chores and then get naked and go in the sauna. Enjoy ourselves. But it was just a really nice group of people that have, great political values and, a little bit of a land for misfit toys. But it's also a place, especially on the range, where, it doesn't matter what color you are, it doesn't matter if you're straight or gay, you're welcome. It's a sanctuary for, freedom. And
why do you think Minnesota has always been kind of liberal? I mean, not all of it, but I mean, it is a pretty liberal place for voting and.
Well, I think it's interesting. I think part of it is because of just when the people that came and the wave when they came, because this really doesn't start going until after the Civil War. It's 1854, but you had a lot of people from Finland, where you have a history of organizing and the Norwegians and Swedes that came here, when they got here, they were, it's hard to believe now but they were treated like, the same things you hear about Mexicans today. They would say,
and those were very poor countries back then. And Sweden was the one with the money, and Norway and Finland, they were like dirt poor people there. So they were kind of like people from third world countries emigrating here for a better life.
Yeah, it was.
I don't know why they chose a place exactly as cold and miserable as where they left, but it's.
But yeah, so I think that has a big thing to do with it, and it was it didn't have a huge Jewish population, but it had a significant Jewish population, and it was Minneapolis is horribly anti-Semitic. I think that's why.
Like Bob Dylan being from Hibbing, that always interesting place for a Jewish family.
Well, that's the Iron Range, because what you were doing, it was you were getting people from Italy, getting people from Eastern Europe, getting people from all over the place, and people Jewish people from Russia who were mining up here. At one point, the Iron Range was considered the melting pot of Minnesota because you had so many different ethnicities, and now it's so not diverse, although it's kind of changing a little bit, hopefully. But yeah, so I think that's And then they put all these, to break up, to divide and conquer, they would put crews together, so you'd have one Italian, one guy from, who speaks Serbo-Croatian, one guy that speaks, Finn, and then they figure, okay, this way they can't organize. But what happened up there, and I think happened here, is that, well, you don't need language to communicate. If you're working together, you get to know each other, and it breaks down some of those stereotypes of each other. And
I got to make sure he doesn't fall down a mine shaft. He's got to make sure I don't fall down a mine shaft.
But I think there's a brotherhood that goes in, any shared.
Hey, your lungs are making a funny sound too. That iron ore mining really brought people together. What are some of your historical obsessions? Like, for me, the French Revolution, the Battle of Little Bighorn. It's been a while since we talked, but I always enjoyed talking.
Well, one of the reasons I took that job, because I did start trying to write. I am obsessed. I do love like Minnesota history, of like early 20th century history, because of the labor movement stuff. Because it is, because I grew up here and they never talked about this stuff. They really went out of their way to like give people the impression that this is a boring place where nothing ever happens except snow. And so to find out that these labor movements, that you have this organized crime here that's based on societal prejudice, so that I love sports, and so baseball history was a big thing for me. And the reason I started doing football history is because baseball history is well covered. There's a million guys who do it, but no one really talks about the history of something like football. And to me, like, maybe it's the Ken Burns model, but you can talk about any history within sports history. You can talk about racial history. I mean, the NFL, when it started in 1920, wasn't segregated. There were African American stars, but slowly guys started getting pushed out. And then when Preston Marshall bought the Washington Redskins, he kind of convinced the rest of the owners, it's like, white people don't want to see black people play sports. Kind of wrong about that. And so the Redskins really were the team responsible behind
breaking the color barrier?
The segregation of the NFL.
Oh, they like made it.
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
So there were no African Americans in football until 1946. And two things happened. A rival league started, the league that gave us the Niners and the Browns. That they ended up folding in, and they integrated. Los Angeles, the Cleveland Rams moved to L.A., and the city, I believe it's the city, whoever was running the Coliseum said, well, if you don't have any African Americans on your team, you can't use this facility. So kind of the Los Angeles Rams they were the first NFL team to have African American players.
I did not know
between,
that.
I think, 33 and 46. It was completely, so.
I like their colors. The midnight blue and aspen yellow is a really great combo.
And the Rams also the first team to paint the helmet.
I did not know that.
A player came up with that Ram design. I can't remember off the top of my head, but that's a pretty cool.
Wow.
I'm going to paint a ram horn on this helmet.
Yeah.
It's pretty, it's pretty cool.
That's great history, man.
Yeah. But I'm partial to the 20th century. I'm a little partial to American history. I'm fascinated with the racial divide in this country. I think there's one of the things I got.
Has it gotten better or worse?
I think it's.
How are we looking now?
Well, the great thing about American racism, it always adapts to the times. It's very flexible, and so we got that going for us. But that's the Mexican-American War I'd like to read more about. I didn't know anything about. A couple of years ago, I was trying to write a one-man show based on all the presidents. And this is, Obama was still president, so I thought I'd have a happy ending for it. But, and you start reading about those guys, and it's...
You said Buchanan was our only bachelor president.
But he was, I think he's our only... You couldn't be openly gay in those days, but he did live with his boyfriend.
He had a valet that he was very tight with or something, right?
Something like, I believe so. I don't know a lot about Buchanan, but he's considered our worst president. But
Okay.
are they just saying that because he's gay?
It might be.
You know, it seems a little harsh. You can't blame the whole Civil War on gay people.
Yeah.
You know, it's just not fair. There's a lot of other things going on. It's like, I think they've suffered enough.
So I met you years ago when I lived in San Francisco, and you were living in San Francisco also, and you were doing stand up, and I always loved your you did Ulysses S. Grant as a comedian. That was always like my favorite bit. You gonna say it or am I gonna say it?
Well, I think I ended up doing it like, just started rhyming with it. Like, my name is Ulysses and I ain't no sissy. If you never see my face, then you never seen a 50. So watch yourself and don't you get lippy. I'll kick your ass back to Mississippi. Rebel yell it, make you spell it.
You do a couple of jokes as Ulysses S. Grant, and then you'd go, I haven't killed like this since Appomattox. I always loved that line. I haven't killed like this since Appomattox. What a great line.
Yeah, that was fun. That's kind of what I ended up doing in comedy is like, because, in fact, I started doing stand-up, which is I recommend to everybody because you should, it's a good thing. Even if you don't become a professional stand-up comedian, it's the truest form of entertainment because you have to control an audience. And it's an impossible thing to do without being really terrible at it. You know, it's a real humbling thing, but I knew I was never going to make it as a stand-up comic. It was actually you, when you lived on Alamo Square. I was in your apartment, and you were giving me some really good advice on how you got to do every set you can, even if you have to drive 80 miles and you're not going to get paid. You have to do this because the only way you're going to develop. And I remember thinking, well, I guess I'm not going to develop as a stand-up comic.
You heard that and went, I'm out. Okay.
Yeah, I mean, hard work and discipline. That's what no one ever talks about in stand-up comic, because it is hard work and discipline. Because I remember, you're going all over the world, and if you had like 10 days off, you'd start getting nervous. You know, you got to be funny every night, and you got to be good, and you got to be constantly evolving, and you got to do the sets, And if you don't do this, there's a bunch of other things you can do.
Well, that's why I like going to different cities all the time, because in your brain is, digesting new brain cells and images and thoughts and new stories, new history, new everything, and then going to the different countries, different histories. There's, no input, no output, as Joe Strummer used to say.
Well, and the comedy writing is really good because you have to be leaner than poetry. You can't have extra words. You have to constantly mold till you get it right. Because if you don't, you just can't go up there and, well, here's some funny ideas I have on the subject of, Applebee's or whatever, No, you gotta hone it. So I think learning how to write comedy really helped my songwriting. I think I don't know if I would have ever been.
It's for economy of words.
Economy of words.
Lean.
Yeah, keeping it lean, telling a story, trying to, not just, I like the Iggy Pop philosophy of songwriting where he goes, when I was a kid, they'd have soupy sales, and he'd always have these contests, and it had to be 25 words or less. And so that was my,
The Soupy Sales rule.
The Soupy Sales rule.
His kids played in a band with David Bowie.
Yeah.
Was it Tin Men?
Yeah.
Tin Machine.
Yeah, hunting 20 sales. Yeah.
Wow.
But comedy's like that. I remember the great Blaine Capash. I remember doing bits new bits, and he'd always say, great, but he'd do the little cut thing with his fingers, and it's like you're always cutting it down to get it to the essentials. And songwriting's the same way. It's like, because if you're writing in the pop song idiom, it's like, man, 3.5 minutes is about as long as you want. And how many times have you listened to a song? Hey, that's a pretty good song, but I was kind of done with it 3 minutes ago. I didn't really. It's not Hey Jude, So
that was my dad's favorite song in Vietnam. In the there was an officer's tent. So he was a pilot. So he was an officer. So their little bar tent where they relaxed was the Officers Club.
Okay.
And he said the jukebox in there was like 5 cents.
Okay.
And he would always play Hey Jude because it was 11 minutes long, and he thought he was getting more for his money. So it wasn't because he particularly liked that song better than others. He just wanted to get the most out of his money.
That's
so I thought it was hilarious. Like, I just picture my dad in Vietnam, like listening to Hey Jude whenever I hear that song. Na 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 na.
I can't remember what song it was, but I was in a strip club doing research once, and some super long song came like, "This is the end," and it's like, great. This is, cause it was like per song. It's like, I'm gonna do a lap dance now because I'm gonna get my money's worth, and then they cut it in half because they knew you're not gonna get a 7-minute lap dance. Cause
every rock fan was suckers.
Yeah.
So you worked at Vesuvio in this bar in San Francisco, right next to City Lights Books, which that is the epicenter of the beat poets and the beat movement. And Jack Kerouac, it's on Jack Kerouac Alley. San Francisco's really changed a lot, but what's the best your best memory from that? What's the best thing you learned about Kerouac or the beats?
Well, I was really into, and that's one of the reasons I ended up in North Beach, is I read On the Road, and,
That's why I moved.
The first book of poetry I bought was Reality Sandwiches by Allen Ginsberg, which, leads you to Corso and all those guys. So I moved there with, like, those kind of, like, beatnik stars in my head, and I also worked at Specs, which...
Across the street, great dive bar.
I think one of the best bars of all time. And in fact, Specs passed away a couple years ago. I had a great dream about him about a month before he died. And we were dancing.
You and him?
Yeah, we were just dancing. We were just cracking each other up. And he goes, "God damn it, let me lead." It's just like, it's just a weird little dream. And then I found out a couple weeks later he had passed. But one of my favorite Specs stories, and Specs was this great old guy. Started this bar, 68. He'd been a sheet metal worker, he'd been a merchant marine, he'd been around the world. And so he just wanted to open a bar where people could just hang out. No TV, no jukebox, no pool table. And they would have a lot of community things there, and they had a lot of memorials. And there was a guy named Willie who had been murdered, trying to help somebody out, and someone mentally ill with a handgun. He was trying to keep her from hurting other people, and he ended up getting shot. Great guy. He had been a longshoreman, and I think he was retired. Loved the Packers. Packers when this ended up, and but one of the things he had done in his youth had played drums with Frankie Yankovic and his polka band. And so during this memorial, and it's really sad, and his lover was there, and she had witnessed the murder and was very, very upset. And she's talking, giving a speech, and she goes, "Willie never did a mean thing in his life." And Specs turns about 5 people in here and goes, "Except for when he played with Frankie Yankovic." But it was just a fun place, and just... I think I really learned there, of all the places, like, you can't judge people by what they look. It's like there's so many amazing people and amazing minds that came through there, and you just can't sort out people by, what they look like, how much money they got in their pocket. Because I met some really amazing people,
I enjoy drinking there, but you're swimming in Minnesota nice. It's great that you moved back home to Minnesota, and it is really a true thing here that the gneiss is a natural resource in Minnesota. The way the Middle East has oil, Minnesota has gneiss. So, you must be happy to be back, right?
I mean, for the most part, I can't explain what I like. My family's not from Minnesota. I moved here as a kid. I have a lot of friends here.
From where?
California.
Okay.
Via Oregon. But my family's actually from Stockton. My parents went to Stockton High in California.
Nice.
If you don't know Stockton, it's like town that got kicked out of Texas for being too mean. Yeah, when I lived in Nashville and you say you're from California, and everyone thinks we're just fruitcakes and palm trees, and but if you go to the Valley, Stockton's a pretty rough place. So
yeah, Tim Wiggins lives in Stockton now.
Oh, really?
Remember Tim Wiggins?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, Tim's great.
Great guy, great comedian. Another great comedian who no longer does it. What was the best advice for comedy you were ever given?
Well, you said.
Okay, doing everything.
Just you got.
What about being a musician and a songwriter?
Rob Kent, real talented keyboard player, he says, you got to learn how to. I started and I had a really good band right away, and I was pretty amateur musician. I'd played for a long time, but not ever in front of people, other than doing a comedy bit or something like that, or jamming with a bunch of guys. Not much. So he said, you got to learn how to do this by yourself. Which I don't know if maybe he just meant I don't want to play with you anymore. But it was like, just be able to go on stage and no matter if they know who you are or not, that's your time and you got to command. Actually, the best advice I got, Larry Miller, he said when you're on stage, you're the only comedian in the room, in the world. That you really have to, you're that. And especially for music, because I was a little insecure about my guitar playing and my singing, but, if you can just believe it, you can shut up everybody and they'll listen to you. One time, Ron Lynch does that midnight show.
Yeah.
And one time, Frank Black was supposed to be the headliner, play a few songs at the end of the show. So everyone stayed to the end. But I guess the Pixies were breaking up that night or something like that, and he couldn't make it. So I had to go on instead.
Oh, great.
Well, that's scary as hell because, you're not. But it's like remembering what Larry Miller said, I am the only musician in the world right now. I mean, they're not watching anyone else. They're not. Frank Black isn't
here. So you went
here.
out and opened with Cactus.
I remember Ron Lynch goes, we'll just say you're Frank Black. It's like,
yeah.
And it's like,
I'd like to do Debaser now.
Yeah, let's not do that. Yeah. Let's not do that. Let's not disappoint these people more than they've already been disappointed.
Gigantic.
And the only thing I have in common with them now is the same haircut. So we've.
What is the best advice you've been given for life?
Oh, I've been given a lot of advice over the years. Most of them I've ignored. That's such a good question. Don't take advice. God, there's so many. I don't. This isn't like anyone told me this, but this is an accumulative thing, and it's just like I try to remember this now. It's just like, but everybody has a story. There are no marginal people. There's nobody here is just going through the motions. Everybody feels everybody's got the same 64 box of Crayolas, and emotionally, there's no, and we all do it differently. And
that's good. What was it? The Mr. Rogers quote. He said, "There's no one you couldn't love once you got to know their story." And then Bob Dylan, in the book he wrote, Chronicles, he said, "Never give anyone a hard time because you don't know what, or we're all fighting our own battles." Mm-hmm. Something like that,
Well, my mother was a school teacher, but when my dad got a job, this is back when moms and dad, mom would stay at home. She tried being a housewife for a year, hated it. But she got a job in the library. She didn't have to worry about having a teacher's salary, So she took the library lady money, but she liked it better because she didn't have to do all that after school lesson plans and all that garbage. but she was always good at like seeing the one girl that's crying. Looks like she had been crying on the school bus, or the kid that just remembering, keeping an eye out for those people that aren't doing quite as well as we are, and just be kind, and it's really easy to be an asshole. It's so easy to be an asshole. It's
just as easy to have a positive effect on someone's life.
But it's I've been helped out so many times by people over, strangers,
Remember, I used to go get fish and make fish tacos for us all the time in the Gaylord. That was always cool.
Yeah, those were good. You make good fish tacos, and you make the greatest BLTs with the Russian dressing and the pita bread.
That's right. Oh yeah. I got that from Kingfisher in Amsterdam. That was the way they do BLT. One of the best sandwiches in Amsterdam. The BLT.
It's a great BLT because the pita bread saves your hand. It's great when you also get pork and pita together because it is really things you're not supposed to do. It's like it's like ham on a bagel, it's pretty good.
Speaking of good food, in Chicago, there's like an independent fried chicken place, and it's called Ezell's. I remember I went there, a Chicago comedian told me, because I love fried chicken.
Now, is it a chain? There's a place in
There's like 3 of them.
Seattle.
There's like 3 locations, and it's called Ezell's.
Okay, I think it's out of Seattle originally.
Okay.
And then there was some kind of split between but yeah. I've never been to Ezell's fried chicken. My sister went by. She was just in Seattle, and she saw it. She's she didn't have time. She loves fried chicken. But I never realized how much I like fried chicken. It's like, because my mom could never make fried chicken. It's like, and then Kentucky Fried Chicken.
Well, 2 of my favorite things in life are fried chicken and watermelon. I think they're the most unfairly stereotyped foods. Who doesn't like fried chicken and watermelon? I mean, if you want to know what I want to have for dinner, in summer, there's nothing better than that.
I can't remember the
seafood. I love seafood too.
Chappelle used to talk about eating fried chicken is the dumbest. What are you trying? I can't remember, but it was just like Chappelle.
Chappelle used to. It's probably the same bit. He said he never eats fried chicken in public. It was a really young Chappelle bit.
Yeah,
it was hilarious.
It was way back when.
He said because people look at him and go, "Look at him, he loves it," just like the encyclopedia says.
That's right.
It was a fucking hilarious Chappelle bit. God. That guy, he just got the Mark Twain Award.
Well, deservedly
and he deserves it. The guy's, I think, the number 1 comedian alive.
The greatest thing about another reason why you should try stand-up comedy is because you get to see geniuses when they're like just children.
Yeah,
and you can tell. But Chappelle,
first time I saw Chappelle, I think he was like 14 or 15.
Oh, you saw him that earlier?
I did a black club in Greenbelt, Maryland. Mm-hmm. This black comic named J.T. Newton took me over. He thought I would do good. And I was excited about it. And they were completely silent while I was on stage. And then Chappelle went on after me. I mean, I was young, but I was probably 19 and he was like 14. Or 15, because I'm a few years older than he is. And he destroyed the place. Guy was brilliant. And I remember, being in the back going, oh, this guy is amazing. Huh. And it was a humbling experience for me. So listen, man, and I've always loved you, Charles, and you're one of my favorite person. I've missed you, man. I've
missed you too.
I haven't seen you in probably, I don't know. Since I think Ashton and I were first dating, first couple of years, and we went to the Dodger game in Los Angeles because it was bobblehead night, and we got the Sandy Koufax bobbleheads. And I remember when we dropped you off. That was when Ashton and I were driving around America back then.
Yeah, okay.
And we dropped you off, and you had left your Sandy Koufax bobblehead in the car. And I called you and drove back and gave it to you. That was like the last time I saw you.
Yeah.
And I think it's, 8 years later. And you're someone I've always wanted to have on the podcast. Love your songwriting. I've always fully encouraged you because you got such a great, beautiful brain. And I hope you just keep writing jokes and songs and doing what you do. I want to close the podcast with another song of yours that I always loved, which is "Booze, Pills, and Her," which I think was probably my favorite song that you did from back in that period when we're living at the Gaylord.
Well,
So tell me about it and
well, I was an old buddy of mine, Mark Masterson, who I need to see. He's still in LA, but I just dropped the line "Booze, Pills, and Her," and he goes, "Oh, that sounds like a song," and it was just like, okay, and I just went and wrote it. My friend Gary Suitcase Smith, who was a NHL goalie for about 18 years, and it's his second favorite song next to "Range Life" by Pavement. That's his first favorite song. But
I love Range Life.
"Booze, Pills, and Her." And I know it's a real favorite of his because I've been over to his apartment. He lives with his son, and every time he tries to play that song, his son Marsh goes, "Dad, no, not again." But it's
And Pavement were from Stockton.
Yeah, two of the guys were from Stockton. Because I remember when that happened.
I love that band. It's one of my favorite bands in the 90s.
Great band. They're playing 2 shows this year.
Range Rovin' with the Cinema Stars. Loved that band.
Yeah.
Well, I absolutely love you, Charles, and long may you run, my brother. And in closing, would you like to say anything before we play "Booze, Pills, and Her"?
Yeah, when I was in Nashville and you do those songwriter rounds, people would explain their songs, and you haven't ever heard any of these people. I would always say, all my songs are self-explanatory.
All right, well, here is in closing, the self-explanatory "Booze, Pills, and Her."
Thanks, Tom.
Shalom, amigo.
Oh, likewise.
I love you, man.
I love you.
Well, I met her on the Greyhound, I met her on the bus, and soon we were drinking, just the two of us. I smiled and I whispered something in her ear, and then the driver said, "Get that bottle out of here." Booze, pills, and her. Booze, pills, and her. I don't know if it's a blessing or a curse, but my new girl, she's a registered nurse. Booze, pills, and her. Well, I wasted all my money, every nickel, every dime. I wasted all my whiskey, but I mostly wasted time. I wasted in the daytime, I'm wasted when I talk. You really start to notice when I try to walk. Booze, pills, and her. Booze, pills, and her. Each one makes the other one worse, and 2 out of 3 really work up a thirst. Booze, pills, and her. Well, I'm sleeping in the bathroom, I'm sleeping on the porch while she's in the bedroom carrying a torch. Sometimes we holler, sometimes we shout. I know I'm gonna get it when my script runs out. Booze, pills, and her. Booze, pills, and her. At least I know where I went wrong. That's why I put it in the name of the song. Booze,